Imagine you are looking at a map of the world. If you look at the vast blue Indian Ocean right in the middle between Africa and Indonesia, you might miss them. They are tiny. They are a cluster of coral atolls, rings of coral reef that surround a lagoon. These are the Chagos Islands. For a long time, most people in the West had never heard of them. But in the world of military strategy and international politics, these tiny islands are giants. They are some of the most valuable real estate on planet Earth. To understand the controversy that exploded in 2024 and 2025, we have to go back in time. For over 150 years, the Chagos Islands were a British colony. People lived there. They were the Chagossians. They were descendants of enslaved people and contract workers who had been brought there to work on coconut plantations. They had a distinct culture, a language, schools, and churches. It was their home. But in the 1960s, the Cold War was heating up. The United States and the Soviet Union were staring each other down. The United States Navy decided they needed a base in the Indian Ocean, a place where their ships could refuel and their bombers could take off to reach Asia and the Middle East. They looked at the map and pointed to the largest island in the Chagos group, Diego Garcia. The U.S. asked their close ally, the United Kingdom, for permission to build a base there. The U.K. agreed, but there was a condition. The Americans wanted the island sanitized. This was a cold, harsh military word that meant empty of people. They did not want a local population nearby. So in a secret deal, the British government separated the Chagos Islands from their other colony, Mauritius. They created a new territory called the British Indian Ocean Territory. Then they did something that would haunt them for decades. Between 1968 and 1973, the British government forced the entire population of the Chagos Islands to leave. It was a tragedy. Families were put on cargo ships. They were not allowed to take their belongings. Stories are told of pet dogs being rounded up and gassed while their owners wept. The Chagossians were dumped on the docks in Mauritius and the Seychelles, often with no money and no homes. Meanwhile, on Diego Garcia, the U.S. built a massive military base with runways, harbors, and radar stations. For 50 years, the base at Diego Garcia was known as the unsinkable aircraft carrier. It was used to launch planes for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was critical for monitoring the oceans. But while the military operated, the Chagossian people fought back in court. They wanted to go home. And the country of Mauritius argued that the UK had stolen the islands illegally before Mauritius became independent. Fast forward to October 2024. After years of legal battles, the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, had already ruled that the UK's occupation of the islands was illegal. The United Nations had voted overwhelmingly that the UK should give the islands back to Mauritius. The British government, led by Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, made a huge announcement. After more than 50 years, the UK would give up sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. They would hand ownership over to Mauritius. The government argued that this was the only way to be safe legally. They said that because the UK was breaking international law by keeping the islands, the operation of the military base was under threat. If they didn't make a deal, the courts might eventually force them out entirely, base and all. On paper, it looked like a solution. The UK fixed its reputation with the UN, Mauritius got its land back, and the US military got to keep its base securely for a century. The Biden administration in the US officially supported the deal. President Joe Biden released a statement applauding the agreement, saying it secured the effective operation of the joint facility on Diego Garcia into the next century. But the reaction was not all applause. In fact, it sparked a firestorm of anger in London and Washington. In the UK, the Conservative Party, the Tories, and other right-wing politicians were furious. They called it a surrender. They argued that the UK was weak for giving up territory. A major voice in this outcry was Nigel Farage, a British politician who is very close friends with Donald Trump. Farage called the deal a disaster. He argued that even though the US keeps the base, Mauritius is the new landlord. And this is where the fear of China comes in. Critics pointed out that Mauritius has very close economic ties with China. China has built infrastructure in Mauritius and lends them money. The fear expressed by critics was simple. If Mauritius owns the islands, could they one day let Chinese spy ships dock there? Could they put Chinese listening devices on the islands next to the American base? The British government insisted the treaty had strict rules preventing any other military from using the islands. But the critics didn't trust it. They said a piece of paper wouldn't stop China in the future. This brings us to the reaction from the American right, and specifically the orbit of Donald Trump. While the Biden White House was okay with the deal because it secured the lease, Republicans in Congress were shocked. Senators wrote letters demanding answers. They felt that the US and UK were showing weakness on the global stage. Donald Trump has a very specific way of looking at the world. Before he was a politician, he was a real estate developer. He built skyscrapers and golf courses. He understands the value of owning land, not just renting it. To a worldview like Trump's, giving up ownership of a strategic asset is a bad business deal. It is seen as losing. The argument from the Trump camp and his allies like Farage is that great powers do not give away land. They acquire it or they keep it. When the Chagos deal was announced, the reaction from Trump's supporters was that the UK had been played. They worried that by becoming a tenant, a renter, rather than an owner, the US military was now vulnerable. What if Mauritius changes its mind in 20 years? What if they raise the rent? What if they fall under the influence of a US enemy? This philosophy connects directly to a strange but important event from Trump's first presidency, the Greenland saga. To understand why the Chagos deal annoyed the Trump world so much, we have to look back to August 2019. President Trump made headlines around the world when he expressed interest in buying Greenland. Greenland is the world's largest island. It is an autonomous territory of Denmark. It is covered in ice, but it sits in a very important place, the Arctic. When Trump said he wanted to buy it, many people laughed. They made jokes about putting a giant gold Trump Tower on an iceberg. The Prime Minister of Denmark called the idea absurd, but in the world of geopolitics, Trump's idea was actually based on cold, hard strategy. And the U.S. already has a military base in Greenland, Thule Air Base. As the ice melts in the Arctic due to climate change, new shipping lanes are opening up. There are vast resources like rare earth minerals under the ice, minerals needed to make iPhones and electric car batteries. China has been calling itself a near-Arctic state and trying to invest in Greenland. Trump looked at Greenland the way he looks at a distressed property in Manhattan. He saw that it was valuable, that it was strategic, and that Denmark spent a lot of money maintaining it. He thought, why don't we just write a check and own it? This is the real estate view of foreign policy. It dates back to the 1800s, when the U.S. bought Louisiana from France and Alaska from Russia. It is the belief that controlling physical territory makes a nation strong. Now look at the contrast between the Greenland idea and the Chagos deal. Trump wanted to expand Western territory. He wanted to buy a massive island to secure American dominance in the north and keep China out. He wanted to own the land so that no one could tell the U.S. what to do there. The U.K., and by extension the U.S., gave away territory. They went from being the landlords to being the renters. They gave up ownership of a key strategic island in the south to a smaller nation. For people who believe in the America First or strong national sovereignty view, the Chagos deal is the exact opposite of the Greenland idea. The Greenland attempt showed a desire to be bold and acquire assets. The Chagos deal, in their eyes, showed a desire to apologize for history and retreat. When Trump's allies looked at the Chagos transfer, they didn't see a victory for international law. They saw the West shrinking. They saw the US and UK losing control of the map, while rivals like China were expanding their reach in the South China Sea and Africa. The shadow of China hangs over both the Chagos and Greenland issues. In Greenland, the U.S. fear was that China would build airports and mining facilities, gaining a foothold in North America's backyard. Buying Greenland would have blocked that forever. In Chagos, the fear is that Mauritius is too small to say no to China. China is a superpower with a lot of money. If China goes to Mauritius and says, we will build you a new hospital and a new port if you let us dock our research ships near Chagos, it is hard for a small island nation to refuse. The Chagos deal includes a promise that Mauritius won't do this, but Trump's worldview is often skeptical of promises and treaties. He prefers leverage. When you own the land, you have total leverage. When you rent the land, you have to trust your landlord. The critics argue that the Chagos deal creates a vacuum. By the UK leaving, it creates a space that a rival power might try to fill. Amidst all this talk of military bases, grand strategy, and real estate, we must return to the Chagossians, the people who were kicked out 50 years ago. Their reaction to the deal was mixed and quite heartbreaking. While the deal was praised by the government of Mauritius, many Chagossians felt betrayed again. They were not at the negotiating table. The deal was made between two governments, London and Port Louis, the capital of Mauritius. The Chagossian people found out about it on the news, just like everyone else. Some Chagossians are happy that the UK finally admitted the land isn't theirs. They hope this means they can finally visit their ancestors' graves. But others are angry. They do not consider themselves Mauritian. They have lived in the UK for decades. They wanted self-determination, the right to decide their own future, perhaps as an independent territory, not just to be handed from one master, Britain, to another, Mauritius. Furthermore, the deal says they cannot go back to Diego Garcia, the main island where the best infrastructure is. They can only go to the outer islands, which have been abandoned for 50 years. There are no houses, no water, no electricity. Going back will be incredibly difficult. As we look toward the future, specifically with the political landscape of 2025 and 2026, the Chagos deal sits on shaky ground. If Donald Trump or a similar America First administration is in power, the Chagos deal represents everything they dislike about modern foreign policy. They view it as prioritizing international feelings over hard military security. There is speculation on whether a future U.S. president could try to undo the deal or pressure the U.K. to back out. However, treaties are hard to break once they are signed. The ship has sailed, as they say. The reaction from the Trump camp serves as a signal for how they will handle foreign policy in the future. It signals a return to transactional politics. This means viewing interactions between countries like business deals. The link between Chagos and Greenland is about control. It highlights a major divide in how the West sees itself in the 21st century. One side, represented by the UK Labour government and the Biden administration, believes that to remain strong, the West must follow international law. They believe that by correcting the wrongs of the past, colonialism, they gain moral authority and better relationships with the rest of the world. They argue that keeping the base illegally was unsustainable, and this deal saves the base. The other side, represented by Trump, Farage, and hardline conservatives, believes that the world is a dangerous, competitive place. They believe that apologizing for the past is seen as weakness by enemies like China and Russia. They believe that strategic land, whether it is an ice sheet in the Arctic or a coral reef in the Indian Ocean, is the ultimate currency of power. The story of the Chagos Islands is not just about a few specks of sand in the ocean. It is a story about the end of the British Empire. It is a story about the suffering of a displaced people, but most of all, it is a flashpoint for a modern clash of ideas. It pits the idea of international law and decolonization against the idea of strategic real estate and military dominance. The transfer of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius closes a chapter on British colonial history, but it opens a new chapter of anxiety. With the U.S. military base now sitting on rented land and with China watching closely from the sidelines, the Indian Ocean remains a chessboard. And as the Greenland example shows, there are leaders who believe that in the game of chess, you should never give up a square on the board if you don't have to. The Chagossians wait to see if they can truly go home. The generals in the Pentagon wait to see if their base is truly safe. And the world watches to see if this transfer of power brings peace, or if it opens the door for new rivalries in the deep blue waters of the Indian Ocean.